This is my LS2 individual throttle body or ITB setup that I've created for this engine. I tried to find an aftermarket piece that I liked or could afford. The very minimum price I could find for an ITB intake, which really is a relatively simple piece because it has no water passages, so it's basically a direct-to-head piece, was I think the cheapest I found was around $1,400, and none of them were in the configuration I needed where they would come straight up and be fairly long. So I decided to create my own, and what I started out with as far as an intake manifold, I looked at tunnel rams, I looked at different kinds that would offer 8 individual runners that were easily modified to attach throttle bodies, and what I used eventually was the Edelbrock Pro-Flo for the LS series motors. And originally this intake would come up and then up to the top and then back down for the runners, with a large plenum at the top that would run down like a log, and then you'd have the throttle body on the end of the intake. But what I did was I just completely cut off everything at the top, cut the plenum off, which then exposed the individual ports, all 8 ports. Now these ports were scrunched up real close together originally, and what I did was cut out a wedge on each side and then break the runners over to the outside, and then I re-welded them all back up so that now they're straight. And you can't really see, but it's a good smooth transition. It's not got the break in it. Bye. And that was my daughter. She was leaving. It doesn't have that abrupt break that you kind of see here. It's fairly well rounded. And so anyway, once I got these 8 runners cut out, I had to weld a plate on the top. And this originally started out as a single 3/8 inch aluminum plate, and once I got it welded in place and I kept it intact so that everything would stay aligned, then I cut each out because there was some warpage, and once I cut those out, they popped back out to the original shape where it could be bolted to the engine, and then I had them remachined so that they were all flat relative to each other after the stress was relieved off of from the shrinkage of the aluminum. Now on top of these mounting plates is an adapter plate, and that's what this is. It's a 3/4 inch thick aluminum plate, and the reason why I designed it that way was, what if I wanted to put Webers on top of here rather than throttle bodies? Well, all I have to do is just change the adapter plate and bolt it onto here, and that adapter plate will make up for any displacement. It may have to be thicker, it may have to be some other design, but at least this way I don't ever have to change the main manifold ever again. I can just fabricate a new adapter plate, which is much easier than what it took to do this. Now the individual throttle bodies themselves are Hallett 48mm throttle bodies, and they came off of a Chrysler LHS V6. They're very simple designs. They have a vacuum port on the side, and basically that's about it. There's the vacuum ports, and so I'm going to run each of these vacuum ports to this hollow tube here, which will be for a manifold air pressure sensor, MAP sensor. And I'm thinking about also running an IAC control, idle air control, on that as well, using that. The throttle bodies are 48mm at the throttle plate, but they did neck down in the very inside to 42mm, and that had to be opened up with a die grinder. And then after I opened it up with a die grinder in the middle, I used my brake hone to get it somewhat smoothed out, and where it actually looked pretty good. And here's an example of what it looks like now. Compared to, and this is a dirty one, but you can kind of see the ridge there right above the hole. It's about, you can kind of see the thickness of it. It's actually about 2.5mm, but it was enough to neck it down, and so I just removed that with a die grinder and then smoothed it up. So that's what I have here, and then I installed the plates back in. The throttle shafts, as you can see here, were originally entire and complete with a groove cut in the middle, but that's a pretty good restriction to airflow. So what it is, I cut the top half away from the groove, left the threaded holes in the bottom, and what I'll do then is bolt on the throttle shaft onto there so it has a much thinner, and you can see the profile of it, versus the unmodified, and this is an unmodified plate, so it almost half the amount of, or provided a pretty significant cross section of improvement on the throttle body. And you can see these four ITBs here, again using the shaft couplers from McMaster Carr. A very simple piece. They've got a little piece of plastic inside there that allows for about 1 degree of misalignment, so they're perfect for this. And then all of this goes on, is bolted on to the throttle plate, and I'll try and pull them off here. And this is the adapter plate that I'm talking about here. And you can see after I pull these gaskets off that I have the round hole here that transitions, as you can see here as I slowly rotate it around, into a rectangular runner configuration. So it does that within about 3/4 of an inch, and it's really not enough of a transition to be too concerned about any kind of an abrupt angles or changes, and I did it as smoothly as possible. I could have used maybe 1-inch aluminum to make it even a better transition, but I feel like this is going to be pretty good compared to what you see from other OEM applications as they try and blend that round port into a square port, rectangular port, especially as you see on some of the old Ford products. These are the original studs from the ITB use on the Chrysler. You notice they have a little shoulder on that, and that shoulder fits perfectly into that recess there on either side of the mounting, and you can see the throttle or the vacuum port there. And basically that's it. It's got ball bearings, it's not bushings, and again they are made by Hallett. I was going to see if I can find a Hallett marking here for you, but don't seem to find them on these. There we go. Just not a big deal, but I just wanted to let you guys see that it was a Hallett, and that's what it says right there, Hallett, across the middle of the shaft there. So it was a pretty good find, I think. So I mount all four of these vacuum ports, one from each side, and then I put them tie them all together into the map sensor. So that's that, and then this piece here will simply, once I get all of the throttle bodies completed on it, will bolt onto the top here like that. And you can see the transition into the port is pretty smooth. If I shift it over, you can kind of see, and as I pull it back into alignment, it's a real good fit. And then I simply connect this back onto the shaft, and then you can sit there and operate it. It's kind of a progressive linkage where it starts off slowly, and it increases to kind of almost snap it open after I get maybe to 75% throttle. It just goes ahead and opens it up, but it's real slow right through here, which is what I want. I want some smooth blend from idle into as I crack the throttle. So that's the ITB setup. That's the Edelbrock intake that was used for it. I used the Ford fuel logs, and the reason why I used them was that I happen to have them from my Ford days. They're angled just right, and the bore spacing is almost identical, within a few thousandths of the LS bore spacing. I'm using the LS2 injectors, but I need to go with LS7 injectors at my projected horsepower, and so there'll be some modifications I still have to make on this. So there you have it. That's kind of a poor man's ITB setup. It's pretty much all homemade, other than taking an intake and modifying it. Fantastic Edelbrock intake. Thank you.